Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Ellensburg, Washington, USA. The local time is about 8:48 a.m. here, Pacific Time Zone. And we'll begin our program on Mount St Helens 40 years ago at the top of the hour at 9 o'clock. Thank you for joining us this morning. How are we all doing? Good morning, United Kingdom. Finland, good morning. Belgium, New York City, Great Falls, Montana. Mossy Rock, close to the beast. Another Belgium. The steady Belgians. Oh yeah, Tumwater, the Carlson family. Silicon Valley, good morning. Another Finland. South Dakota. Dick from the Netherlands. What a pleasure to have you all here this morning. Whoa, there's a bunch of you already, isn't there? Interesting. Makes sense. This is a special morning. Wausau, Wisconsin. On Wisconsin there, Vicky. New Zealand, good morning. Yes, we're in the front porch as predicted. It's a wet morning here in Ellensburg. The chalkboard's getting kind of moist out there in the backyard, but I've got all sorts of stuff there on the table that we're going to be using this morning. And yeah, we'll talk about our plan once we get up there. So good morning, Ryan and Jack. So we're starting early as we normally do to make sure that we're functional. It seems like we always have some of the comments about I'm out of sync and I'm too fuzzy, and I've realized that's mostly folks having some issues on their end. But I think we're doing okay, but can I confirm with you, please? Jason, thank you. The light and the sound look good. Thank you, Joni. Yeah, wind chime, but I don't think it's gonna be making any noise this morning. 5 by 5. Many of you are regulars and you know who we are and what we do. But I suppose we'll have some new folks, so I might say a couple of extra special things this morning. I think that'll work. Let's look at the schedule for next week. Should we do it in dramatic fashion? So I've been doing 5 of these a week, and I take Monday and Friday off. So I won't see you again until Tuesday night at 6 p.m. We're going to talk about something called slow earthquakes, Tuesday night at 6 p.m. Pacific time, otherwise known as ETS events, episodic tremor and slip. Wednesday night, lahars in Washington, so we'll be coming right back to this topic of Cascade volcanoes on Wednesday night. Thursday we'll go specifically to a valley that is between Yakima, Washington and White Pass. Saturday morning, hotspot volcanism. Sunday morning, Bing Crosby geology? That sounds weird. Weird's okay. Weird is good. Italy, good morning. Gwynquit, Maine. I tried. Matt is weird. Good to know. Spain, good morning. Spokane. Portland. You're new to the channel. Thank you for joining us then. Oh, things are seem a little off kilter here. I don't know. What do I need? Good morning, New York City. Oh, it went too quick. Oh, gun quit. I don't know. Evelyn, Isaac, good morning. Got somebody to thank. Personal delivery yesterday about noon. Thank you, Julie. And thanks to all of you for all of the generosity. What's on your mind this morning? I have a plan. I have a loose plan. Think it'll work. Do we have some other locations? I'm just curious how wide-ranging we are this morning, and if this is a noticeably different crowd than we've had before. Probably about the same scene. We're up to almost 600, it looks like. Heidelberg, Germany, good morning. New Jersey, some county in Pennsylvania, Leavenworth, Portland, Maine. Kathy from Australia is here. Same suspect in Japan. Pullman, Tennessee. This is such a treat, as always, to be live with you. And we will do a fair amount. Another Netherlands, good morning. UK, it's a reasonable hour there. Holly. Clearwater, Florida. Virginia, Eric, you've been a regular. Sudbury, Ontario. Melissa, you've been a regular. Plenty of regulars. I don't know, what is this? Episode number in the 40s, right? So many of you are just so steady here. Terrific to see. No Muffler Boys yet. Charleston, South Carolina. Visited for my first time, Liz and I, last spring, a year ago. That was fun. Portugal. I wish. Winnipeg, Manitoba, the former Lake Agassiz. Excellent. Well, if you are new to us and you're like, why isn't this guy starting? We'll start in 3 minutes, top of the hour. People are just kind of showing up at various times, and I start ahead of time just to kind of test things out and make sure we're all feeling like we're... Hello, Dartmouth, England. How was the gin? Oh boy, lots of emails about how I'm an alcoholic and I'm a terrible role model for children. I thought it was obvious I was drinking water, but I guess it wasn't obvious. I guess I'm a good actor. So, what? I don't know. I think I'm a decent role model, but apparently not. Okay, I got 2 minutes. I think I'm gonna stroll around the kitchen here for a second and mutter to myself, and I will be. I'll be back to start the program at 9 o'clock. Thank you for joining us. Here's to you. That was an early toast. To you for joining us this morning. Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for joining me here at our home in Ellensburg, Washington. My name is Nick. I'm a geology teacher at the college here, Central Washington University, Ellensburg, Washington, USA. We've been doing these live streams from home here since St. Patrick's Day. I think this is number 45. We've been doing 5 of these a week, and this morning is a special episode looking back 40 years ago this weekend to a volcano in our state that erupted, and everyone knows Mount St Helens because of that, even though it was 40 years ago. Actually, my students, 19-year-olds, are a little fuzzy on what Mount St Helens is or was. As time marches on, we lose the specific memories, but many of you have a very vivid memory. That memory is seared into your brain about where you were at 8:32 in the morning, Sunday morning, May 18th, 1980. That is our topic this morning. And technically we're a day off, it's May 17th, but we'll refer to 40 years ago this morning, and you'll know what I mean, right? Because we don't live stream on Mondays. So, I don't know if you've been online or if you've been watching television or other forms of media, but there's plenty of looking back, of course. 40 years, this is done every year, and then a special set of programs, etc., every 10 years to look back. I suppose there'll be another one 50 years ago, there were 10 years from now. So what can I offer you this morning that is different than everybody else. I think the usual is if you're at a news channel, a TV station, a local TV station, you kind of run some of your old clips. And if you're a newspaper, you kind of have some old, file photos, etc. I do have something that I think is unique, and I'm excited to share it with you. And I'll give you the loose plan I have for our session this morning. But in general, I want to tell you a quick little story. I think it was 2 weeks ago I got an email from Jane in Seattle. And Jane said, "Hey, I've been enjoying those live streams from your house. It's nice to see you're busy during this pandemic." And I've emailed a little bit back and forth with Jane a few years ago, before that, because I did a program on Mount Rainier's Osceola mud flow. And I heard from Jane back then, a couple years ago, and she said, "Really enjoyed that program, and I want to thank you for showcasing some of the work of my dad." So Jane's dad was Dwight Rocky Crandell. That was his nickname, Rocky. Rocky was the nickname given to him by a professor at Yale back in the 1950s or 40s, I guess, post-World War II. Rocky was a World War II vet from Illinois originally. But Rocky was a geologist for the USGS, and Jane, his daughter, was the one contacting me a couple weeks ago. And she said, seeing those live streams reminds me that I got a bunch of papers of my dad's that I think I need to deal with somehow. And I'm wondering if you'd be interested in taking a look. And this is 2 weeks ago. And I said, "Oh yeah, Jane, that sounds good. When this all kind of settles down, maybe I'll come over and visit and you can show me some of that stuff. Or maybe you and Dave want to come over here and I'll take you down to the tab. We'll have a super mother and then we can look at those papers." And then last Sunday, after I was done with you last Sunday's live stream, I started thinking seriously about what I was going to do with you today. And I emailed Jane last Sunday and I said, "Hey, I think I'm going to change my answer. I think I want my hands on those papers now. Is that possible?" And she said, "Well, Monday's your off day of your live stream? I'll meet you at the pass." In other words, we'll drive halfway. Jane from Seattle, me from Ellensburg. I'll meet you at Travelers Rest parking lot. I'll give you those papers. So that's what happened 6 days ago. And I had these 3 boxes of Rocky Crandell's papers, notebooks, journals, photos, letters, sitting in those 3 boxes until yesterday, when I was finally done with the Milankovitch cycle thing, which took me a while to figure out how I wanted to present that. And so I sat down last night going through those 3 boxes. And there's an amazing amount that's there. So I would like to, this morning, look back 40 years ago to Mount St Helens and the events leading up to the eruption and the eruption itself and the aftermath through the eyes of Rocky Crandell. And Rocky is not just a minor character, he's the man. He's the geologist that's meeting with Jimmy Carter a few days after the eruption, and there's major national news coverage. He's the geologist who's trying to decide how to evacuate people safely before the May 18th event. Rocky Crandell. You should know about him if you don't already. And so that is the plan. Let's look at the plan specifically then for this morning. So here's what I have in mind. We'll see if I stick to the plan, but we're going to kind of go through the context of leading up to the event, the May 18th eruption, and a little bit of the aftermath, all through the eyes of Rocky Crandell, using a bunch of his actual papers over here. And then we'll go in the Cozy Fort, and if you're new to us, the Cozy Fort is where we actually look at a few little video clips, and anybody can do this, but I found some stuff on YouTube that I think is particularly good, and I want to share it with you and at least give you a tip on how to look into this a little bit more. And then I know that you'll have questions, as we always do, but I also know that you're a human being and you'll want to share your memories. I mean, that's a common thing. I've heard my fair share of stories of where you were on that morning. And I think I'll share some of those live with you. I'll just kind of read some of your stories to everybody. So this is probably going to be a long one. And in case you're curious, in May of 1980, I was not in Washington. I was in Wisconsin, just about to graduate from high school. So I have no personal memories of being here in Washington, but many of you do. And because I don't have those personal memories, and because I'm not a research scientist, I feel like sharing Rocky's details is a good way to go about things this morning. So hopefully you're okay with that. Dwight Rocky Crandell. He worked for the USGS a long time, and his collaborator, Donald Molyneux, those two guys, Rocky and Don, created a lot of publications over the years. Decades worth of research with all the Cascade volcanoes, not just Mount St. Helens, not just Mount Rainier, in the 1950s and 60s. Let me show you a few. First of all, do you need a visual right away? Here's Rocky Crandell. This is, I think, an unpublished autobiography, maybe written for family and friends. So there's a lot of stuff. I'll go quickly through this, and I'm going to purposely avoid talking about mud flows today because this coming Wednesday, we'll devote a whole program to lahars, and that's really, I think, Rocky Crandell's most impressive contribution to the geology community as a whole, lahar hazards. And so let's save that, even though there was dramatic lahar events down the Toutle River with Mount St. Helens, let's kind of put some of that on hold until Wednesday. But here's an example of Rocky's notebook. Here he's working at Mount Rainier, Osceola, Lowland, back in the 1950s. Handwritten notes, field geologist, out there every day. He had plenty of opportunities to join universities and become a professor. He wasn't interested. He just wanted to do his own thing, follow his own interests, and do research. And so as early as 1962, Crandell and Molyneux are publishing on Mount St. Helens. Now, keep track of the dates. We're looking back to the eruption of 1980, but this is almost 20 years earlier, and they are doing a lot of work with the volcanic deposits on and surrounding St. Helens. Presumably these are all available online somehow for you. This is GSA Bulletin Volume 73, blah, blah, blah. Okay, no time to go through all those. And then as we march a little bit closer to 1980, there's more from Crandell and Molyneux. I'm just grabbing the St. Helens stuff. They've got publications like this. Those guys worked so hard, and they were so prolific in what they were putting out as publications. I just grabbed a few of the St. Helens publications leading up to 1980, but Crandell, Rocky, and Don were at Hood and Baker and Shasta, etc., Lassen. They're publishing on all these cones and using these kind of state-of-the-art techniques at the time to try to get started on working out an inventory, as we've been talking about in past live streams, working out an inventory of past events. You know, it's not particularly sexy visuals. You know, it's the 1970s. But here's an old shot from Delano photographic mapping out of Portland. So here's what Mount St. Helens, I'm sure you've seen plenty of photos of Mount St. Helens and how beautifully symmetrical and perfect it was before 1980. I'll show you one more. Is this still Rocky and Don? Yes, it is. Of course it is. So this is the most famous of the publications involving Mount St. Helens research prior to 1980. And this was published in 1978 and presumably written in 1977. And why is this so famous? I think I've shared this in a past live stream, actually. This is famous because of the last couple of paragraphs. where after, now we're talking about more than 2 decades worth of careful research at St. Helens, predicting the next eruption. This is Rocky writing in 1978. This volcano's behavior pattern suggests that the current quiet interval, more than 100 years, will not last as long as 1,000 years. Instead, an eruption is more likely to occur within the next 100 years and perhaps even before the end of this century. And it erupted less than 2 years later. Okay, so that's the backstory that gives you the sense that, this is not an unstudied mountain, an unstudied volcano, and then all these geologists are just starting to, drop out of the sky 2 months before the eruption. At least Crandell and Molyneux had been carefully working on St. Helens, among other volcanoes, for a long time. Now, this is also an original from Rocky's collection, and here's the cover of that publication that I just shared with you, but it includes the signatures of all the geologists who were working on that team at the time, including Dave Johnston. But we'll talk more about Dave in a bit. But it was a small group of working geologists who had kind of devoted a full court press to this mountain in the years and then especially months leading up to the event. Okay, so now we're up to the spring of 1980. And for those around the world or those young viewers who are not even sure what the topic is this morning, we're eventually getting to this. So this is the Sunday morning, May 18th, 1980, when this volcano goes. And now this part of the story is Crandell and Molyneux are publishing that we got to be very serious about this mountain based on the work we've done so far. And this thing might erupt before the end of the century, meaning it might erupt before the year 2000, or more likely within the next century. But again, May of 1980. All right, next little batch of stuff. So here's a diary that Rocky kept every little day in 1980, a couple of little items. My dad used to do that as well. I've got all those old Badger books. Here is Rocky's, a collection of his field notes when he actually started showing up at St. Helens starting in March of 1980. Look at this. It's a Mead spiral notebook that you can buy at Safeway somewhere, maybe in Colorado, for $1.89. He's a regular guy. He's a gifted, hardworking geologist, but I love the kind of common touch with a lot of this. He's taking very careful, important notes in a Mead spiral notebook. This isn't, Algebra 2 as a freshman in high school. So I just went nuts reading this last night at midnight. But anyway, I'll just grab a little bit for you. So here's Rocky Crandell, April 19th, which was a Saturday. Now, St. Helens had started to become active. Puffs of steam, bulge on the north face, etc. And here's Rocky keeping track of his activities. I'll just give you a little taste of this. Couldn't see above Dog's Head yesterday. Survey to get started on Monday. Flagstaff group will do photogrammetry. Use ground material from previous mapping. Dave Johnston, should prepare a statement. What is known and who is doing what. Present the facts to the press. Who can prepare a call for pollution statements or standards, EPA. Dave should arrive tomorrow. So Dave Johnston, and if you're unfamiliar, this is one of the saddest stories of this whole saga. He was a 30-year-old geologist who perished on the morning of May 18th. So Dave shows up from somewhere and reports to St. Helens about a month before, so his last month on Earth. So here we are, Sunday morning, April 20th, and the meeting is between Andre, Rick, Dave Johnston, Chris, Rocky, Arnold, and Ken. Do we have a radio man? Regarding Ape Cave, let's talk to Jim Nealand about that. Muddy Creek, very muddy yesterday, also North Fork, talking about seismicity. Johnston needs to do water and ash work, can analyze for sulfate, sulfide, and something else. Fluoride very low. So, I mean, this gives you a little window in how these guys are trying to kind of get together. By this, there is no Cascade Volcano Observatory at this time, if you're unaware of that. You've heard that Vancouver, Washington is right across the river from Portland, Oregon. And the Cascade Volcano Observatory is now a fully staffed operation. But back then, these are USGS people from across the country who are kind of flying in and starting to work in groups to try to deal with this. Let me give you from Rocky's autobiography. Are you enjoying this? I hope you are. We'll eventually get to, I guess, what you want to talk about with the live Q&A, but this is how I'm choosing to kind of bring in a rather specific flair to this discussion. So here's from Rocky's autobiography. What did I want to read to you here? Sure, why not? I was in my Denver USGS office, this is Rocky writing now, Thursday afternoon, March 27th, when Don called from Vancouver with the news that a small steam explosion had occurred at the summit of the volcano at 12:27 his time. As Don and I talked, Don Molyneux, as Don and I talked, we were both greatly excited and elated that our volcano was coming to life, just as we had anticipated. But our elation was tempered by concern that the small eruption would quickly progress into something major, like some eruptions in the past. I agreed to come to Vancouver, Washington, on Saturday to help with hazard assessment. I arrived mid-afternoon, so this is March 28th. I arrived mid-afternoon at the U.S. Forest Service headquarters and walked into a bedlam of ringing telephones. Don knew that I was not yet involved and asked me to prepare a new map that showed hazard zones for eruptions of 3 different magnitudes. By 5 a.m. the next morning, I had worked out a suitable approach and had made a rough draft of the hazards map. Later that day, a USFS draftsman made 10 copies, which were used at innumerable meetings and conferences. From then on, I was in the midst of a hurricane. This is late March. This is almost 2 months before the main event. I was designated, this is Rocky writing now, I was designated as the person in charge of hazard assessments. Bob Christensen came from our Menlo Park, California office to supervise monitoring the volcano, and Don Molyneux was the USGS spokesman and in overall charge of the survey's activities. At least one of us senior scientists, quote unquote, was supposed to be available in Vancouver at all times. We, as well as other geologists who came to Vancouver from various USGS offices, responded to all telephone calls for information about what the volcano was doing and how we viewed the potential danger. No email now, everything's by phone. In spite of the people set to help us, we were badly understaffed and quickly became overworked. My diary notes how many hours I worked during the first week I was there. March 30th, 22 hours. March 31st, 20 hours. April 1st through 5th, 17 hours each day. Because of the stress and loss of sleep, my health rapidly went downhill, and I found it hard to even think coherently. I finally took a day off on April 9th. Again, we're more than 5 weeks away from the event. This goes on, of course. I'm not going to read you the whole thing, but there was another segment that caught my eye. Where was it? Nope, moving on. One more thing from this preamble before the main event. We're almost there to the big event. This is written, so now Rocky is under so much stress, and he was at St. Helens for so many weeks straight, not taking a day off hardly at all, that this is written on May 17th, the day before the main event, from Denver. So he was, you know, somebody else was in charge for a while. He was going home to just kind of de-stress possibly. Here's his letter to somebody. I'm temporarily back in Denver. This is May 17th. For a short period of rest and relaxation, but we'll be back to our volcano by next Friday, if not sooner. I learned last night that the eruptive activity had again temporarily quieted down, though the earthquake continues at the same rate and the volcano continues to bulge. There is little question that molten rock has moved into the volcano, but there is still some uncertainty about when or if it will come to the surface in a full-fledged eruption. Comer and Penny wondered why my name has not been in the news about Mount St. Helens. In the first place, I have avoided publicity as much as possible in order to accomplish my main purpose of being out there. My job is hazards coordinator, and I spend much of my time talking to public officials as well as people who live in the area. Second, I avoided all press conferences and left them to my friend and colleague, Don Molyneux. Don is the scientist in charge of the whole USGS operation at St. Helens, a job he very reluctantly took on against his better judgment. Bob Christensen from our California office is the coordinator for geologic studies and monitoring activities. The three of us are more or less alternating with each other so that one of us is on hand out there in Vancouver all the time. My private concern, which I don't intend to include in a press release, is that the continuing strong earthquake activity indicates that a large volume of molten rock is continuing to move into a reservoir beneath the volcano. The more molten rock in the reservoir, the larger will be the eventual eruption. Demands from the news media have been quite a shock to all of the geologists on the project. Just answering the questions that come in from all over the country nearly every day could be a full-time job for 2 geologists. And so far, we have not had even 1 geologist to spare for this. So we all try to field the questions as best we can. Most of us have been on local TV several times, and a few have even agreed to go on national TV. Oh, that was the other thing I wanted to read quickly. I can't find it now. You know, People magazine is wanting him to do a photo spread. He's turning down all these kind of media requests to just try to do his job because he feels like everything is so understaffed and they're doing the best that they can. Hey, the sun's out. All right. Let's keep going. I got a couple more movements in this little act, and then we'll go to the Cozy Fort and actually time travel back to some of those events. So it's common for many of us to have Mount St. Helens ash. This is the ash, some of the ash that fell in Ephrata, Washington, from the main event. I don't need to go through the basics of that. That's been covered over and over and over again. Of course, there are plenty of books. There's Volcano Cowboys, and Rocky is featured in this book. Rocky was not particularly pleased with the tenor of the book. He felt it was a little bit over the top. That's my understanding. I guess it's not appropriate for me to say that. This is a blow-by-blow account from Richard Waite that I enjoy reading, but I never can quite make progress. I haven't gotten more than a third of the way into it. Kevin Scott so there's so much out there. Steve Olson has written a book that you may have seen. And from a teaching point of view, many of us in the 1980s would use this slide set that was put together for teachers. We were all using slide projectors. You know, you drop the slides into the little slide carousel, And so, this was the way for us to show a bunch of the details. Again, I'm choosing not to kind of go through what I consider the very obvious and very well covered segments of the story. This is my attempt to do something slightly different than everyone else, as usual. Well, that's all leading up. So we just heard from Rocky, who was in Denver on May 17th, the day before the main event. And then Sunday morning, I think the best way to convey to you what happened in those dramatic moments and precious hours with life-saving events are a few things we'll do in the Cozy Fort. So I'll let that speak for itself. But since I've got you here, before we crawl into the Cozy Fort, let's do a little bit more with Rocky. So a few days after the event, Rocky is still dealing with the press, kind of reluctantly. And Jimmy Carter, the President of the United States at the time, has shown up. So here's Rocky, and here's President Carter. A lot of coverage, obviously. Another photo of our man Rocky Crandell and Jimmy Carter. A little note of thanks from the White House a few days later. Plenty of work between Rocky and the Washington state governor at the time, Dixie Lee Ray. There was some story, I don't think I can find it easily, that Dixie Lee kept saying that I'm not going to make any decisions until I talk to Rocky Crandell. He's my main go-to man. And he's like, well, we talked a few times, but I don't know if she has come to me that often. I'll finish the Rocky portion of this using these personal things loaned to me from his daughter Jane. Thank you, Jane, for your trust here that I'm using these appropriately. This is the last thing I'll share with you. Again, there's 3 boxes worth. December 19th, so now we're half a year after May 18th, and Rocky is writing to Bob Yates at Oregon State University. And I like this paragraph, or I think this paragraph is interesting. Rocky is thanking Bob for writing something in the media about the USGS action, trying to save some lives before May 18th. And Rocky is telling Bob, I agree with your opinion that the access restrictions in effect on May 18th around Mount St Helens saved many of the lives. Nevertheless, I am scientifically and personally distressed that we did not accurately foresee the scale of the events of May 18th. In retrospect, I attribute this failure to our inexperience in making day-to-day and hour-to-hour hazard assessments at an active volcano, and to the crisis environment in which we were working, with little time available to isolate ourselves, reflect, and discuss the implications of all the monitoring data. Obviously, we should have taken this time in spite of the continuing pressures to become involved with the issues unrelated to hazard assessments. We have learned many lessons from Mount St. Helens experience and surely will be better prepared to cope with the next volcano that resumes activity. Thanks again for your support. Sincerely yours, Dwight R. Crandell, Geologist, Engineering Geology Branch. And to lighten the mood just slightly, because I deal with a fair amount of folks with a bunch of interesting ideas, Jane included this in the box. Much of this I'm returning to Jane, by the way. She's just loaned this to me. This is a letter from Missouri to Rocky Crandell on May 22nd, 4 days after the eruption. Mr. Crandell, I have been following the news on TV, radio, and newspapers about the Mount St. Helens eruptions at Vancouver, Washington. Down in this part of the country, Missouri, we have water well drillers that advertise a well in a day using a rotor bit. They can drill 500 or more feet per day. Now, my idea would be to drill a hole, maybe using an oil drilling rig before that eruption, and put in a pop-off plug, similar to the pop-off plug, bathroom hot water heater or pressure cooker, only a larger scale. And then when you know the eruption is about to take place, someone could remove the pop-off plug, or the hot air or steam could blow out of it, and then all that lava would just stay in that mountain or come out the drilled hole and not blow the whole top off, and do all that damage and ruin a lot of property. May I hear from you and what you think of this idea and why it would not work? I am 69 years old. This idea first come to me, and I really would like an answer one way or the other. Mr. Brown in Missouri. And Rocky replied by mail. Dear Mr. Brown, thank you for your interesting suggestion regarding the control of Mount St. Helens. Unfortunately, it is not in our power to control the immense forces involved. For example, it has been estimated that the volcanic explosion on May 18th had the force of a 10 megaton hydrogen bomb. A pop-off valve, such as the one you suggest, could hardly restrain such a force indefinitely. And it might also be difficult to find a volunteer to remove the valve so that the steam could come out as you suggest. Sincerely yours, Dwight R. Crandell, Geologist. So using the power of audio visuals, shall we go? Instead of reading through this Bible, shall we actually go to some amazing video clips, mostly from local television channels? I find that to be effective and quite impressive in cases. And we'll deal with a few of the human interest stories that many of you remember, often with tragic results. I'll just do a little bit of this, but I'll give you a taste of a few places to go in case you want to watch full programs on this, in case you haven't known that those were available for you to watch. And then we'll go to your live Q&A. And the sun's out, and I think I'll just go ahead and say it. You remember we took a walk up on top of Craig's Hill, and we walked all the way to the point where we could actually see a little layer of Mount St Helens Ash from 1980? That was a couple weeks ago. I was surprised at how many of you enjoyed that little walk and that little thin layer of ash. So we've already done it with one of the live streams, but I think I got my gizmo powered up, and you're not required to stick around, but I think we'll take a little walk when we're done with your live Q&A/memories of May 18th. Okay? Hey, we got 1,000 people, man. Let's keep it going. So it's time for the Cozy Fort, trademark Steve, Cedro Woolley. And Liz is in the kitchen, grabbing a few things. Oh, I got to move you now. Hang on. Should have done this earlier. Many of you want to meet my wife, and she's like, I kind of like my privacy. Understandable. So give me a second, talk amongst yourselves. What kind of role model are you drinking all that gin? I was just absolutely embarrassed. You are not professional. Okay, so it's hard to convey. Quiet. It's hard to convey what life was like to younger people where we're all watching local news. Like, I remember even as a college kid, I'd tune in to watch the local news and the national news, and in addition to the newspapers, that's how you got information. And so I find these clips from local broadcasts, especially while this eruption, like the day, May 18th, basically 40 years ago this weekend, I find it particularly powerful, and maybe you will too. So this is KGW in Portland. I've just grabbed a few little portions of these clips, and I don't even remember what we're looking at here, but I hope it'll be self-explanatory. Let's go.
It's hard for many of us, and that includes a lot of geologists, to realize just how quickly all of this has happened, Robin.
In fact, it was only 7 weeks ago, can you believe it, that St. Helens was a quiet, snow-white mountain. John Tuttle shows us that old familiar sight and how it changed.
It was Monday, March 24th, when officials in the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest started taking St. Helens seriously. The earthquakes on the mountain had started 4 days earlier. By that Monday, they were coming at a rate of 40 an hour. People were warned to stay off the mountain, and the U.S. Geological Survey moved in with monitoring devices to listen to the tremors. At that time, St. Helens had gone 123 years without erupting. The most recent eruption of any volcano in the 48 states was California's Mount Lassen in 1915.
We're cautioning people about going up on the mountain itself. Spring vacation is coming on, and the nice weather and the mountain climbers and the cross-country skiers, mainly because the avalanche hazard warning is at the high stage because of the earthquakes.
Tuesday, March 25th, the mountain shuddered with a quake that registered 5 on the Richter scale. Crevices began to appear on the Forsyth Glacier, and the Forest Service began organizing emergency plans to evacuate lowland areas of southwest Washington. Roadblocks went up on Highway 504, and the Rangers were evacuated from Spirit Lake. That was the day Northwesterners were introduced to Harry Truman, the man who said he wouldn't leave his home at Spirit Lake.
I'm not going to leave here because I'm the only one up here. There's nobody else that lives up here in the wintertime. So it's just going to have to run Truman off this lake, and I'm not going to go.
On Wednesday, scientists were saying mudflows on St. Helens were possible, and they described a lava eruption as a remote possibility. Thursday, March 27th, shortly after 1 in the afternoon, KGW's cameras flew over St. Helens and got the first pictures of steam rising from the summit and the big black hole in the top of the mountain. Through the day, that hole widened, and there were signs the north slopes of the mountain were actually shifting. Still, the big concern was the potential of mudflows loosened by heat, not lava. But the scientists were beginning to admit that the mountain was in the classic early stages of a volcanic eruption. Friday, Pacific Power and Light drew down
All right, I guess
of water from Swift Reservoir, anticipating as much as 100,000 acre-feet of mud that could hit in the event of a mudflow.
here.
Its way to within 1,000 feet of the summit. The earthquakes were stronger, and the plume of ash was rising to 16,000 feet, and the winds were carrying it towards Portland. There were reports the mountain itself was swelling and actually tilting the south shore of Spirit Lake. And Wednesday, geologists reported the volcano was shooting out desk-sized blocks of matter. Watch to the lower right-hand side of your screen, you'll see one. And scientific instruments were now recording harmonic tremors, rhythmic vibrations that indicated molten rock was moving inside Mount St. Helens, another indication of a possible eruption of lava.
Okay, yeah, this is...
Thursday, the geologists who'd been conservative in their predictions at every stage had turned around.
We're not going to have a lot of warning if a final big eruption starts. I think probably a day is the outside.
And minutes on the inside?
Yeah, minutes, or it might happen without really telling us it's going to happen. It might just go.
That interview is more than a month old. For a month, we waited, wondering what was next from St. Helens. In fact, the clues to what was actually happening inside the mountain may have been there in late March or early April. But then...
Chokes me up every time. Dave was from Illinois. Rocky was from Illinois. Rocky beat himself up over that loss. But they really did the best they could do. Another clip.
Has been flattened. Forest land many people were calling home. And for the few people air rescuers have brought out, it's a frightening tale of survival in a nightmare. Bill Van Amberg reports.
Now this is after the event.
It started in Tootle, but when threats from the rising river got too bad, the massive air rescue efforts moved to Kelso. All day and into the evening, searching through almost impossible situations to find almost impossible survivors. People who had made it through dust, ash, and devastated forest, struggling to survive in a wilderness gone hellishly mad. These two young campers and their dog had been staying along the Green River, more than 15 miles from the mountain, when suddenly the forest was flattened.
Yeah, it was real bad.
What was it like? I mean, how long were you in there?
Well, too long. It took two of our best friends' lives, so.
Did it really?
Yeah.
There had been 6 in their party. 2 others were injured but got out. These people had had to hike well over 14 miles, as did this man, whose family was worried he was dead.
They brought out, I think there were 2 boys and a couple. Did they have burned hands? One had burned hands. One had burned hands up to about here. Mike, I'll tie it down. Why don't you take him in and introduce him to Cole, and maybe Cole can tell him, describe what he got. That might be his family. I'll walk in there now. Hey, go ahead, lock it up.
He had driven his truck until it just plain quit. He couldn't shake any more ash out of the air cleaner, walking in a dusty gray rain until choppered out. Fortunately, his family is safe as well. Unfortunately, it's a hit-and-miss situation for rescuers.
You had to have an aircraft with you to get ours in and out because of the dust conditions when you're going in. You go inadvertent IF.
Well, you know, it's easy to be cavalier. I can see some of your comments now. It's easy to be distant and removed from these situations, but can you put yourself there for a second? This is amazing stuff. I think this is the guy that they visited with maybe months or years after that we just saw, who was completely shell-shocked with his girlfriend and his dog. But this gets into a little bit more footage of high-stakes drama in those hours for the people trying to survive this event.
A lot of fun, fishing and hiking and just doing all the things we usually do. It's paradise where we were. It's all virgin timber.
We chartered a plane and we took off from Yakima at 7:15 in the morning.
More than 100 people were in the shadow of the Mount St Helens volcano on that Sunday morning in May 10 years ago. They had come to play and to work, to study and to watch. One of the watchers, an amateur radio operator named Jerry Martin, was one of the first to see the mountain erupt. His last words were captured on tape by ham radio operator Reed Apgar in Olympia, Washington.
I just felt an earthquake.
64-year-old Gerald Otis Martin volunteered to watch the volcano as part of a group called RACES, radio amateurs who were an official part of Washington State's emergency plan for monitoring the mountain. On that morning, Martin sat in his camper on a ridge 9 miles from the volcano, outside the restricted zone. At the same time, Weyerhaeuser employee Ed Hinkle, at his vacation home near Silver Lake, west of the mountain, experimented with a video camera that the company wanted him to learn how to run. Hinkle's unique videotape shows what happened that Sunday morning as Jerry Martin describes the scene with his last words.
Now we've got an eruption down here. Now we've got a big slide coming off. The slide is coming off of the west slope. Now we've got a whole great big eruption out of the crater. And we got another that opened up on the west side, the whole west side, northwest side, that slides down.
The earthquake that occurred that triggered things was simply the straw that broke the camel's back.
Dr. Don Swanson came to Oregon just days after Mount St. Helens came back to life in March. Since then, he and other scientists had been watching an area on the north side of the volcano called Goat Rocks, which had been bulging outward.
We think that this earthquake was triggered by some movement within the bulge, and that was enough to kind of shake the whole thing, just like a bowl of jelly, as people flying overhead at the time commented on.
We saw saw a tremendous fracture open up. The fracture, it was as though the mountain were being divided in half.
And there was a tremendous steam explosion, a lateral blast, as all of the hot gases and water trapped beneath the mountain slopes flashed to steam. And that propelled the avalanche material and the outer flanks of the mountain northward at 300 to 600 miles an hour.
5 miles north of the volcano, on a ridge, sat U.S. Geological Survey scientist Dr. David Johnston, who had set up his camp to give him a good view of the volcano. Johnston knew the mountain might explode.
How soon do you think that might occur?
Well, if it occurs, it would probably be no more than a few months on the outside, but it could be as soon as a few hours.
On Sunday morning, May 18th, Johnston was awake and watching. His last words by radio, "Vancouver, Vancouver, this is it." Searchers never found the body of David Johnston. Jerry Martin sat on the next ridge back from the mountain, so Mother Nature gave him a few more moments to live than Johnston.
Here we go, boys. The whole northwest section and north section blowing up. Brian is coming up over the ridge towards me. I'm going to back out of here.
Martin's last words seemed to indicate that he saw the blast cloud that killed David Johnston.
Gentlemen, the camper and the car sitting over to the south of me is covered. They're going to get me too. I can get out of here.
The forest north of Mount St Helens provided work for hundreds of loggers. On that Sunday morning, a crew of 4 men woke up, and 3 of them went to work at their job of thinning.
Couple other quick things, and then we'll go to you. Yeah, some of you wanted to know this is a particularly good program. Can you read it? Can I read it? Northwest Reports, Mount St Helens, KPTV 1990. So this was for the 10th anniversary Portland footage. I got one more clip that's from CBS News. Dan Rather sitting in for Walter Cronkite. And they go to Ritzville.
Grouping without any particular danger at the moment.
Last Sunday, when it blew, 2 other geologists were flying directly above what is now the crater and saw it all. Keith and Dorothy Stoffel.
Hang on.
On top of the north side.
I don't know the Stoffels.
And saw it all. Keith and Dorothy Stoffel.
The whole top of the north side just began to ripple and kind of churn up, and everything to the north of that just slid away, just completely slid away, and within seconds after that, a huge blast occurred.
The clouds, as they rose, what happened?
They were billowing up almost like in big pillow sort of structures. And at that point, of course, I was terrified personally, and we weren't sure that we were going to make it out of that situation at all.
To the east, in Yakima, Washington, residents weren't sure until today how they were going to get out of their situation. Volcanic ash everywhere. But tonight, the mountain is just spewing steam. The worst of the ash problem may at last be over. Terry Drinkwater, CBS News, Portland.
The Agriculture Department says it's too early to tell about the damage Mount St. Helens will do to crops and livestock, but just about any place in the area, life has changed dramatically since Sunday. For example, look at Ritzville, Washington, with Harold Dow.
Words just can't describe Ritzville, Washington. 3 days after Mount St. Helens blew her top, smothering the central Washington community under 5 inches of volcanic ash. It looks like the aftermath of a brutal winter storm. But it's mid-May, and the dust is much harder to remove than snow. Graders, snowplows were all pressed into service. Despite their unusual dilemma, residents manning shovels and brooms seem to be in good spirits. Haven't seen anything like it ever.
I don't know. I tell you, I never want to see it again.
The volcanic dust storm hit suddenly last Sunday afternoon. 1 minute it was sunny and bright. The next minute it looked like night. Ash falling everywhere.
Well, the community did a great job. We had about 2,000 people stranded. They took them in their home, their churches, the schools full. We fed them good, no problem with food and medicine.
And some of those who were stranded here feel the same way. They couldn't wait to leave.
Incredible. I couldn't believe it. It was scary. You know, you couldn't see in front of you, and you started breathing the stuff, and of course had no idea whether or not it was poison or harmful.
In this convoy are some of the 2,000 people who have been stranded here since Sunday. Law enforcement officials have decided it is safe for groups of travelers to go. Everyone is leaving Ritzville in a cloud of dust. Harold Dow, CBS News, Ritzville, Washington.
Okay, well, that's my best effort to bring that day and week to life for you. Muffler boy. And so if you give me a moment here, I'll be ready to read some of your comments. So if you're new to us, would love to answer some of your questions the best that I can. What we do is use uppercase or caps lock so that I can easily see your question. Kids, I'm always happy to try to answer your questions. And for this morning, as a kind of an addition, I think I see already many of you are sharing your personal memories of where you were, etc. But maybe I'll try to repeat a few of those for those that can't see the live comments. My feet are cold. Hang on. Perfect. I got my bunny slippers on. I'm ready to work with you here. And I'm not sure if Jane, the daughter of Rocky, is with us or not this morning. She thought maybe she would. And if I happen to see Jane here, I'll try to incorporate her somehow in this. Okay, I'm scrolling back to some uppercase, and I'll try to keep this going for, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes, something like that. And then if you want to take a walk, we'll take a walk as well. Down in Salem, Oregon, we had to wear masks and change our air cleaners on cars every week. Michael says, the ash on my Portland roof tore the gutters off my house. Paul, did Mount Rainier do a similar thing, or will it? Yes, Paul, there's evidence for pyroclastic flows, ash fall, volcanic mud flows with Mount Rainier dozens of times. And there is a very real concern for something similar, or dare I say it, worse with Rainier in the future. But we don't have the ability to forecast eruptions yet. Where was I? I was back in Wisconsin, about to graduate from high school. I had no interest in anything besides sports and girls. Why didn't more ash fall on craters of the moon? Got it. What about Mount St. Helens got you interested in studying geology? There's an article in the Yakima paper this morning that talks about our live streams, by the way, but also has a photo of me when I visited Mount St. Helens in 1983, and that was really an important afternoon for me to become interested in geology. I just couldn't believe the devastation, like everybody else. That was my reaction. And I went back to school. I had taken a semester off of school. I went back to the University of Wisconsin and took a Geology 101 class specifically because of that experience I had 3 years after the fact. Obviously, I wasn't in any harm, but visiting that mountain in the weeks and months and years after the event, that also leaves a mark in your memory. And for me, I became very curious about natural science because of that afternoon. And by the way, in case you're unaware, enrollments in geology departments across the country, maybe around the world, but especially in the U.S., the number of geology majors went way up in the 1980s because of Mount St. Helens. And suddenly there's all these geologists and geology discussions in newspapers, on TV, and it became kind of a galvanizing force. So I guess I'm part of the group that became a geology major directly because of Mount St. Helens. I took structural geology with 75 students, and it's normally a class that has like less than 20. Why wasn't there any lava? Thank you, Saab. These cone volcanoes typically explode in ashy deposits and pyroclastic flows, and the lava is too sticky to flow away. Now, that said, there are stratovolcanoes, and even St. Helens has had some lavas, but not the typical orange Hawaiian-like lavas. That's mixing volcanic styles. You're not alone to ask that question. What did the explosion sound like? I don't know, Lorraine. Maybe somebody can comment on that here in the live stream. I found other kind of footage of a videographer from Seattle who was trapped and was trying to escape, and the sky was dark and he was still talking. I almost included that, but I thought it was a bit too intense for our young people. But you could hear this kind of thunderous kind of roar, but I don't know anything beyond that. Muscle 783 says, yes, I'm here. Does that mean no? If that's Jane, you let us know. What evidence did Rocky use to predict the eruption? That's a good question. How can I paraphrase all of his work? It was so remarkably symmetrical, the Mount St. Helens cone, that it looked fresh. There hadn't been lots of erosive canyons cut into the flanks of the mountain, indicating that this is a mountain that is particularly active and continues to rebuild those slopes on a regular basis. What else in years before St. Helens did he use to predict its activity? That's a very good question. They didn't have the precision to get repetitive dates and know that, in the cycle we were close. So I guess just the young look of the mountain, that's a kind of a crappy answer. It's a good question and a crappy answer. Jane, that is you, Muscle 783. If that truly is you, if you have questions for Jane, please ask her specifically, and I will try to, I don't know. I will try to figure out how to, maybe I'll repeat a few of the questions for Jane and then keep my eye and see if Jane has a reply. And so that's kind of fun. How far did the ash travel as compared to Yellowstone supervolcano? The ash from Mount St. Helens, George, did travel across the country. Of course, the ash got finer and finer and the ash layer got thinner and thinner, but you can find St. Helens ash as far east as the Mississippi River drainage, basically. But compared to Yellowstone, we had a supervolcano live stream, or if you want to watch a lecture that I did in part of the Downtown Lecture Series called Supervolcanoes and the Pacific Northwest, I did my best to quantify how the amount of ash with this event, although deadly, was 1/1000th of the ash. That's conservative, by the way. There were thousands of times the amount of ash from his Yellowstone event, so they're really not even in the same ballpark. Did many people suffer respiratory issues as a result of the eruption? Unaware of that, Teresa. Maybe somebody can answer for you who remembers the specifics, or maybe a health person or a nurse can chime in. Do I have a quick explanation of how the eruption happened scientifically? I really don't, Andrew. There are so many basic questions we have about magma systems. And that was what the geologists were trying to do. As you heard from Rocky's description, they were understaffed. They didn't have time to even reflect on all this data coming in. And so to understand the crucial, this leads to this, leads to this, leads to this, we're still struggling with basic things, and I'm saying we as geologists as a group, you know that I don't do the research. I'm not a volcano expert, but those former students of mine that now are working at the Cascade Volcano Observatory, they all have their specialization, but we're still in the dark ages. I don't think it's inappropriate to say that. We're still in the dark ages as far as understanding volcanic systems and earthquakes. Maybe that will upset some scientists who've been devoting their life to it, but we know a fraction of what we might eventually understand about volcanoes and earthquakes. I have to show the slippers? No, I don't. How far did the ash travel as compared? George, you repeated your question. I think I answered it now. Oh, people want to know about lava. There's some sticky, high silica lava that has grown in the crater since 1980. There were other big mushroomy-like ash events, by the way, all through the summer of 1980 into 1981. And that's kind of an afterthought to our discussion, but and the lava dome building started up again 2004 to 2008. So if you're like, I thought it wasn't that long ago. I remember Mount St. Helens was doing some stuff. Yeah, that was 2004 to 2008. Matt says, my house in southeast Portland had lots of ash on the roof and in the street. Thank you. Which is currently the most active volcano in Washington? I guess St. Helens. But I think what you're really saying is kind of which cone is most likely to erupt next, and no way to answer that with any sort of data. I'll try a few more here. Is the Crater Glacier still growing? A new ice age seems interesting. A new ice story seems interesting. Carlson family. Yes, we did a program on PBS, these little 5-minute short things called Nick on the Rocks. And the last one we did, maybe the last one we'll ever do. I don't know. We're not doing any this year because of obvious reasons. Chris Smart, the videographer Chris Smart from Central, hooked up with a former student, Angie Diefenbach, and Ben Pock, and they flew in on a beautiful bluebird day in August, I guess it was. I was back in Wisconsin for personal reasons. And Chris got some amazing... Hang on. This is worth it. Wait, do I have it? Let me see if I have it first. Chris Smart from Central, yeah, I do have it. I'm not going to bother with the Cozy Fort, but let me give you some unedited raw footage. I've got 3 clips where just a few months ago, Chris and Angie and Ben flew in. Angie and Ben work for the USGS. They were installing some and monitoring some equipment. But Chris was hanging out the side of the helicopter with his video camera. And here's a rare opportunity to fly into the crater of Mount St. Helens. I'll show you 3 of these. The last one has the Crater Glacier, which is thriving and growing, and that glacier is obviously brand new. There was no crater before 1980, so there was no Crater Glacier before 1980. And of course, people who are not believing in, well, let's not do that. This is fun. I hope you enjoy this. We're flying inside of the crater of Mount St. Helens. You're looking inside of the mountain that was not exposed until 1980. I think it's fun to include that sound. That's obviously the helicopter blades. Here's another one with some of the USGS folks working with their GPS receivers that are mounted inside of the crater on the lava dome. So that's lava that was active between 2004 and 2008. That's lava in the foreground. It's not the orange stuff you're thinking of, but it pushed up like toothpaste. And then the last little raw clip that got me thinking about this was the Carlson family asking about the Crater Glacier. I find this, had no idea there was that much ice and it looks this beautiful inside. All right. Well, let me try to get back to the questions, and we've got Jane, so maybe Jane is replying to you all, or maybe I can help get it's a treat to have Rocky's daughter with us, isn't it? I say, isn't it? I don't know if I've scrolled back far enough, but here we go. How has the post-eruption research improved our ability to predict eruptions? Thank you, Tom, former geology student at Central. We're making progress. You know what I mean by we. I would say most of the progress has been on the technology side, developing monitoring equipment that can gather a bunch more data than we had. I said this in the Yakima paper this morning, and it's just relaying from a couple of interviews I did long ago for television with a couple of the USGS guys. If we had the technology back in 1980 that we do now, David Johnston would not have had to be sitting there in that folding chair. He was doing measurements between his chair and the north face of St. Helens and repeating his measurements to try to monitor how much the bulge was moving. And it was moving multiple feet per day, by the way. So it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out something major was about to happen. But David and many of the other geologists don't have to be there now. We have technology. But as far as improving our ability to predict eruptions, I don't see an improvement at all, to be honest. But I may be not reading the right stuff or listening to the right people. My wife and I heard the boom while living in the Tri-Cities, says Doug. Heard a loud thunder at Oregon coast, says Stephen. Dave says he worked for the city of Quincy. We used rubber bits on our snowplows to move the ash off the streets. That's interesting. Colette, age 7, asked, was there more than one kind of ash from Mount St. Helens? Well, more than one kind of ash. Colette, it's a good question. If you are downwind from Mount St. Helens, in other words, to the east of Mount St. Helens, you can find many layers of ash from different explosions of Mount St. Helens over the last few thousand and even million years. And each layer of ash might look a little bit different, or it might be a little bit different in thickness, but you can get chemical fingerprints from each volcanic ash layer and tie it to a particular mountain, chemistry-wise, but also where you are in the layering, Colette. But with the actual event of 1980, that main event, May 18th, which we are remembering this morning, 40 years ago this weekend, I don't think the ash changed dramatically, although now that I say that, I think the ash initially was black, and it became lighter gray as the day went on. I think that's what I saw in one of those old clips. Maybe somebody can change me. Sorry, I'm trying to read it at the same time. Maybe somebody can correct me. We got ash in southern Iowa, says Sue. It was horrible, says Tim. You could see it, hear it, then feel it. There were many booms. Jane says, you're welcome. This has been awesome. So Jane is, I think, maybe she is communicating. I don't have the time to read each of these comments. Crandell predicted Helens would erupt by the end of the 20th century. That's correct. Maybe you joined us late. We went through some of that. Ken remembers Jane's father, Rocky. This is fun. Slick Rick reports that his grandma lived in Walla Walla and sent me some ash in Mississippi. Lots of people thanking Jane for sharing her father's journals. Nancy and John were in Troy. They heard a sound. It was a boom, and our dog, Troy, Idaho, excuse me. I don't think I know where Troy, Idaho is. It was a boom, and our dogs responded prior to the sound. Thanks, Jane, for sharing materials with us. Living in the shadow of Mount Rainier, says Bird the Tree. How has monitoring and detection improved? I don't have specifics or the time to get into the specifics, even if I had them. But new gizmos, new technology, new monitoring system, new ways to collect information is coming from all angles. Lots of love here for Jane. That's wonderful. Darger DT says, back in 1980, it wasn't possible to really predict when a volcano would blow. The actual moment, I mean. Has that changed in a good way? How good are the predictions? If you hear somebody predicting an earthquake or a volcanic eruption down to a day, you're not listening to a science person. That's it. We're way away from that. We maybe never will get there. So there's an edge right now because there are people who are, quote unquote, predicting events. Let's not go there. Couple more and then we'll take a walk. How about it? It's still sunny outside. Daniel, do you think when Mount Rainier erupts it will or will not be as bad as Mount St Helens? We don't know that, Daniel. The geologists are very concerned about Mount Rainier. They're concerned about each of the volcanoes, Daniel. And I don't know where you live, and I don't want to upset you. But there are smart people who are working as hard as they can to keep track of what's going on with these mountains. And it's not a guarantee, but Daniel, it's quite common for these mountains to have small events leading up towards a big event. And the small events are not harmful. That's what we were just discussing with Rocky's activities. He was here working around the clock weeks before the main event. And so if you're worried about your mountain, first of all, do you know that the mountain is a volcano? If it is, and you can see the volcano from your house, then it's smart for you and your family to learn as much as you can about what geologists know about the mountain. But I want you to know that we don't know everything. But we're working as hard as we can to keep everybody safe. Joni says respiratory issues in those exploring the lake area later. Erica, in Yakima, we ended up with an ash pile from our driveway that was approximately 6 feet tall by 15 feet long. Wow. Yeah, is it Chesterfield Park that has how much ash beneath those soccer fields? They created a city park in Yakima basically after dumping all the ash. Then the ash doesn't melt. You got to put it somewhere. So Yakima decided by 40th there to just dump it all in one spot, as I understand it, and make a park where our kids used to play youth soccer. Most of you asking about monitoring, and I've given you the best I can answer there. 3 more and we're done. Como TV in Seattle has footage of a cameraman trying to get away from the eruption. He made it out, luckily. Thank you, Bruce. Yeah, I chose not to show that one. I'm not a role model or anything, but I thought that would be too much for the kids. But it's there. I simply just went in YouTube. I just simply searched 1980 Mount St. Helens newscasts or news reports or something. And there's tons of stuff. And I saw some of you were talking about Jeff Renner, who used to work for King 5. And Renner has a little interview with Dave Johnston. And I think it's a brand new thing they posted just yesterday with Jeff Renner remembering his experiences, and they had a news helicopter come down on a car that they found in the blast zone, and the driver was still in the driver's seat. Again, my choice is not to include those. Evelyn, age 7, what did the CW geologist do before or during the eruption? This is before I was working here, Evelyn. Don Ring told the story that he was doing a field camp down in Eastern California. So many of the geology students here at my school were actually in California. And Don, who was a former neighbor, he passed away a couple of years ago, remembers kind of talking to his family on the phone. And it's like, boy, how are we going to get home? And his memory was more like, I wonder how much jeopardy my family is in. And one of those clips was kind of reminding us of that people, the uncertainty of it and not knowing how much risk you were dealing with, let's say the next day or the next week. You know, we can relate to that right now. How much danger am I really in? How carefully am I listening to all these suggestions? Why do I get conflicting information about what I should be doing? Weird parallels to right now, isn't there? Oscar asks, how much ash did Ellensburg get? Well, let me show you. Let me show you, Oscar. So I got to get out of my bunny slippers. If you, let me do a formal goodbye to everybody in case you want to take off. I'm done with what I had to share with you, although I want to show you in case you're interested in coming back, since we had a big number today. I will see you next with a live stream Tuesday night, Pacific time, 6 p.m., talking about these things called slow earthquakes, also known as episodic tremor and slip events. They're fascinating, and I hope that you'll enjoy that program. We'll come back to the Cascades and do more with Jane's father and his papers, and go to other volcanoes besides Mount St. Helens on Wednesday night. Thursday night, we'll go to a valley that's west of Yakima, where the Tieton andesite is a lava flow that came from the Cascades and flowed almost to the Fred Meyer in Yakima, almost to that park with all the Mount St. Helens ash. And then Saturday morning, 9 a.m., hotspot volcanism. And Sunday morning, 9 a.m., Bing Crosby geology. That sounds weird. And as a special thank you to sticking around this long, just a little one-sentence summary of what he did on May 18th, 1980. May 19th, 1980. Talked to the President of the United States. May 21st, 1980. Thanks for joining us. A toast to you. Here's to you and your health, especially as we think back to that terrible morning for many on May 18th, 1980, but also as we think about this event we're dealing with right now that will also be talked about in the history books for many decades to come. Here's to your health. The health of your family and friends, near and far. And a special toast to those who continue to work with volcano research and hoping that we can continue to build on the very important work of Rocky Crandell, Donald Molinall, and others. Goodbye from Ellensburg, Washington, USA. Thank you for joining us. I love you. Goodbye. Okay. You got to give me a few minutes now. We're going to walk up and try to find some Mount St Helens ash. But to do that, I need to convert over to data. I need to get the gizmo hooked up, get the Bluetooth synced up. So I think I'm going to freeze for a little bit. In other words, my frame is going to freeze, but I think I won't kill the live stream. And then we'll take a little walk. I'm thinking this is going to be another 15, 20 minutes. So it's up to you. You got time? I should close these windows. I was told not to videotape the inside of our house too much, so I do as I'm told. All right, I was going to bring an umbrella, but I don't think I need to do that. I'm going to bring this little tool to get us up there. Maybe I should bring my Mead Spiral notebook. I could be like Rocky Crandell 2.0, which means I'm going to lose the wireless. So you're going to go away for just a sec. Oh, wildlife. You're going to go home for just a, you're going to go away for just a second, okay? I'll be right back, hopefully. How do I get to that? Hang on. I think I'm back. I think I'm using data, but I'm not sure I got the Bluetooth thing set up properly. No, I don't. I gotta connect the Bluetooth thing. I gotta go away again. Hang on. Hey, you wanna go inside? Come on. Come on. You go inside? All right. Thank you for your patience. Daddy had a little problem mentally. I couldn't remember how to get to my apps to connect the Bluetooth with the gizmo, but I think I got it. and I'm pretty sure I'm data. We're down to 800 people, and I understand why. So let me... Dale, you're going to hurl now. Finally. Okay. We got 800 people. We got our thing. We're walking. I can't believe how much the skies have cleared up. It's like it was meant to be or something. Let's go a different way. We're not going to see the Stewarts anyway. Yeah, maybe we are. We'll go right up the middle of the road. Social distancing and all, you know. Hey guys, I think you've been on camera once before. This is embarrassing. Thanks. No Mount Stewart today. If you're not sure what we're doing, we're walking up to the top of this little hill called Craig's Hill in my neighborhood in Ellensburg. That would be a nice little cherry on the top, wouldn't it, to see some of the fine ash that fell out of the sky on the exact morning that we've been talking about today. Steve Moe doing his reading. Whoa, we're gaining people. I'll never understand that part. I'm not arguing, but I just don't get why people, like why the numbers grow and then they go down and now they're back down. Okay, I'll just stop talking. You know, this live streaming is there's many things to experiment with, things that I'm learning, obviously the technology part of it. I don't think I had my data roaming on. I think my data roaming is on now. We back? You know, when you talk live to a group, if you have a lot of practice, you can easily tell how things are going. And if everybody's asleep, if everybody, you know, if the energy's low, you just kind of, I don't know, drink water out of a bottle of gin and everybody starts laughing. And there are those magical moments where the energy is just so perfect in the room, you can just hear a pin drop basically, and you know it's working quite well. I say all that to say that with these live streams, you're left with you only have one choice. You just plow ahead, like you have no real idea if it's going well or not, or how to or when I should pick up the pace or slow it down or whatever. And then, just giving you a little insight here, And then if you do try to get some feedback on how things are going and you start glancing at a few comments as you're talking, of course you see stuff like, you're out of focus, and all this stuff, and as you're talking and trying to concentrate, all you can think of is just like being in a live room and people are just yelling out stuff like, don't walk over there. It's just super distracting is my point. So Milankovitch yesterday, I was pleased with it mainly because it seemed rather coherent and I didn't do a terrible mistake in there, to my knowledge. And this morning, I honestly have no idea if people are pleased or not. So you just kind of learn as you go. Nice to be walking with you this morning. For those that have been trapped, hopefully this feels in a weird way like some sort of walk in the neighborhood. And this is public. This is a public little spot, I suppose, if you want to drive over here to Ellensburg and see this St Helens Ash for yourself. Starting to get a few too many people dropping in at the house. I knew it was kind of risky, I guess, to be sharing so much, but so far nobody's really crossed the line, in a way. So I'll just hope that doesn't become a major problem. It's pretty obvious where I live now and that sort of thing, but people have been very respectful to this point. So if you took this walk with us last time and you don't recognize what's going on, we're just walking up the other side because I don't think the views are as nice as they were that evening. What was that, a couple weeks ago we did that? I was really surprised at how many people were just over the moon about that little ash. That wasn't even the plan. Actually, you know what? There is a nice view of the Green Canyon Knotch. Okay, I got a little homework for you. If you haven't, you might watch the Ellensburg Blue Agate show. It's one of the first live streams we did. Of course, I still haven't learned how to zoom. But you can see the Green Canyon Knotch pretty well. Yeah, I got to figure out how to zoom. I forgot about that. So do you see there? That's the Green Canyon Knotch, where a river used to flow from Liberty. Remember Liberty Gold? And Rob Reppin's mine is on the other side of that ridge. And so there used to be a river that flowed through that notch and brought blue agates. Edward, I don't know how to zoom. And as I mentioned before, the rodeo grounds is right beneath us, in the American Legion building. Everybody needs Zoom. Yeah, well, you know what? Okay, so here's our landmark, the water tower on top of Craig's Hill. We got one lonely guy in a red truck. Hopefully we're not doing something completely illegal. I'll get all nervous. No, he's just remembering the good times. So in case you're unaware, actually reading the newspaper. That's an old guy move. Let's see what's in the news of the world. Let's open the newspaper. If you're unaware, we had so much ash in the sky here in Ellensburg that by noon of that day, 40 years ago, it was black. It was dark. The street lights were on. And it wasn't just Ellensburg, of course. It was most of the communities in eastern Washington. And so over the years, I've gotten photos that people took from Craig's Hill here, from this neighborhood, on May 18th, and how it was dark all day. And then by Monday, May 19th, the skies had mostly cleared. And what was left was this layer of fine volcanic ash. So this is a long way to answer the person's question, whoever it was. How much ash did we get in Ellensburg? The answer is about 1/4 of an inch of fine ash. And the ash is our destination here. You know, when I cut you off last time we were up here, I was laying in the bushes, and I got up, you know, I'd ended the live stream, and boy, Monashtash Ridge and the Yakima Canyon was so perfect. I was like, yeah, why did I end the feed? It was so beautiful. And the light, of course, is not much this morning, but I'll kind of show you at least the vantage point that, you know, this is maybe as good as anything. So now you're looking south. Uh-oh, where are we? You're looking south towards Monashtash Ridge and the Yakima River. Can't screw it. We're getting off kilter here a little bit. Okay, we're here. We're here. So if you want to come up and look for yourself, you head to the water tower and then you head up a little higher. Yeah, I'm taking you off the gizmo right now. You hold you steady while I power the gizmo down. He tells himself, remember the gizmo. Don't forget the gizmo. All right, well, we have different lighting conditions here tonight, so maybe that's what I'll start with. For those that were up here with us before, this is a look off to the northwest. And look at all that tan in the lower left. That's all loess, L-O-E-S-S, loess. Wind-blown silt, kitchen flower, that has been deposited here in this valley for thousands of years. And the shock for many of you is that there's a bunch of this tan loess sitting on top of the 1980. I'm seeing technology problems, but I'm going to leave it to you guys to figure that out. I'm on data, and I'm off the gizmo. And let's head over here, see if the lighting's any better or any different than it was last time. So here's the old railroad right-of-way and the guy where the kids do their dirt biking. We're looking to the east now. This is the Milwaukee Road that came from Chicago all the way to Seattle. Got pushed through here. And here's folks out for a Sunday morning walk. Technically state park land. But here we go. Oh, yeah. This is better. Look at that. It's an incredible amount of loess. I'm going to just hold this as steady as I can right now. And now he wonders, can I zoom with my fingers like I'm using my iPhone camera? And the answer is yes. So I go down on one knee to propose to you to steady things. Can you see this? I should have done my homework. That ash bed, can you see that ash layer, that faint layer of ash? There's even a little notch in the cliff. That's not 1980 Mount St Helens, but that is an ash bed Ash fell out of the sky from a Cascade volcano, presumably tens of thousands of years ago, but sorry, maybe we will do a little field trip here if I take the time to learn what we figured out about that. But that's not why we're here. We're here to go back up towards the top of this little tan cliff, and I'll show you where we sampled the ash before, the 1980 ash now. I'm gonna give you context. I'm gonna come in. You can see the bush in the upper left. I'm holding this as steady as I can. The bush in the upper left, got it? And then to the lower right, just past the shadow, I've got it centered in your frame right now. That's the 1980 ash. Oh, you can hear the dog down there in the trailer park? Wow. You can see where we're headed? Nick on the loose. Peace out, bitches. Now that was unprofessional. I thought you were a role model for the kids. Swallows have been enjoying this. Okay, let's go over. I got to push myself up. Ah. St Helens Ash from 1980. Ash bed from tens of thousands of years ago. Maybe thousands of years ago. All right, let's go over there. I don't know if I'm going to land my belly again. Maybe I can come in this way. The light's better this way. Gizmo into the grass. Don't forget the gizmo. All right, I'm going to come in this way this time. This gives you a little context. Here's some kind of wet ash. It's been raining this morning. We need to get that dry stuff. Okay, he's down on his belly again, folks. But I'm coming at it from the other angle here this morning. Two knees straddling the loess like a boss, right between the eyes. I need a third hand here. I need a third hand to kind of get in here and rub this stuff around. Can't do it. Can't do it. How close can I get? Ash from St. Helens, 1980. And I hope you can see that there's at least 12 inches of loess on top of the ash that got blown in. Yeah. Let's try it one more time. Mommy, what's that man doing up there on the top of the cliff? Is that legal? I don't know, dear, but let's just pretend he doesn't exist. All right. That was a Starsky and Hutch roll. The shot I showed you last time was our layer of ash, which you can kind of see with 12 inches of loess sitting on top. Okay, I think you've got it. I bid you a fond farewell. I bid you a fond farewell this morning From Ellensburg, Washington, I genuinely appreciate you joining us this morning and all these live streams. Some of you have been here pretty much every time we've had one of these. And I'm still going week to week. I don't know how much longer we'll be doing these, but each weekend I say, well, what can I do the following week? And some of you have been sending in some ideas, and some of them I actually like. And so we'll just continue to roll that way. Peace out. Thanks for joining us. Mount St Helens, Jane Crandell. We salute all of you. Have a nice day. We'll see you Tuesday night. I love you. Goodbye.